Cat fact: you can't keep a good guy down, or a bad guy. In the 80s, Marvel published a series that was called The Official Handbook to the Marvel Universe. While they were printed in the same format as comics, the inside is very different. It's basically an encyclopedia. Later on, they came out with the deluxe edition, which is part of what I have, and specifically towards the end, they published an issue that was covering the Book of the Dead, who was basically everyone that was deceased. This one in particular was published in 1987, and I wanted to look at all the Captain America's characters in it who have since come back, because it's most of them. The first of these is Baron Blood, who died in 1981 and was revived. He was actually revived much later in 2014 for the all-new Captain America starring Sam Wilson. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, he's more of a Nick Fury villain, but he shows up enough in Captain America that I thought I'd mention him. His is complicated, where he has died and come back multiple times, whether through robots or clones or whatever. But I think he's back now, or at least has come back often enough that even if he's dead right now, that's not going to be that way for long. Then we've got Baron Zemo Sr. Cap has a lot of Baron villains. This is Heinrich Zemo, who is the father of Helmut Zemo, who's the one who shows up in the MCU and is now the Baron Zemo in the comics. Baron Zemo has stayed dead. There was one time where he almost got revived, but he's stayed dead mostly because, his son was able to take over as the Baron Zemo. Blue Streak was a D-list villain, and he's one of the ones that was killed off by the Scourge, whose real world purpose was basically to get rid of a lot of the lesser villains that were wandering around. It seems he did briefly get resurrected in about 2009 when he was killed in the mid-80s, but he was basically revived to then die again. So it gets a half count, I guess. Next up is Bucky Barnes. He's probably the most famous, where he was dead for 40 years in real world. In comic world, he would have been dead for 60. But he came back, and he has stayed back as the Winter Soldier, which is probably the most impressive on the list. Then we've got Sharon Carter, who she was surprising with how long she was around before she died, and then how long she stayed dead for how big of a character she was. She came back in the mid-90s, so probably about 10 or so years after this was published. The final one in this issue was Death Adder, who was part of the Serpent Society. He was also killed by Scourge and brought back later in the mid-2000s, but he also died in about 2012. So he was brought back, but not for very long. So out of the 7 people we talked about, you've got 3 who are now solidly alive. You've got Strucker, who's in his own weird category. Then you've got Blue Streak and Death Adder, who died and came back. And only one, Baron Zemo, who has stayed pretty solidly dead. Death is not very consistent in this world. September 26th, I'm going to be presenting at FanX in Salt Lake City with Matthew Glover and Jason Olsen. We're going to be talking about Cap's greatest writers. So if you're in the area, come check us out.